Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Garden Variety Ethics. This week I wanted to explain what the term veganism means exactly, and what living a vegan lifestyle entails. So first things first, what is the definition of veganism? According to the Vegan Society, an organization founded in the UK that coined the term, veganism is a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of, and cruelty to, animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. Fairly straightforward, right? Well, let's take a closer look, as there are a few operative phrases here. First is the as far as is possible and practicable phrase. This is an interesting phrase because I think either word, possible and practicable, on their own would be improper for a definition of veganism. If it were just as far as is possible, veganism would be incredibly demanding, likely to a point where it would be untenable. Take, for example, animals that are killed during the harvest of crops. This is one of the main points of contention that non-vegans use to try to diffuse the argument. The argument goes something like this. Many animals are killed in the harvest of crops. If we're committed to veganism, we should try to refrain from killing animals. Therefore, we should eat animals, not plants, since we would be killing fewer animals. This argument fails simply because of the crops we grow are used to feed the animals that we eat. Therefore, if we were to only eat animals, we would be causing the death of even more animals that were killed during crop production. Even if animals and plants required the same amount of crops to grow, eating animals would still kill more animals because you'd be eating the animal too. According to the Beef Cattle Research Council, which, judging by their numbers on water use, which entirely exclude the water used to grow their food and run their farm, I'm going to guess conservatively, it takes 10 pounds of plant feed to produce 1 pound of beef. In any case, while the number of animals killed is disputed, modern agricultural practices do inevitably result in the death of some animals. Does that mean we ought to abstain from eating any crops harvested in this way? Unless we're able to all grow our own food, no, that seems unreasonable. Maybe that should mean that we take seriously efforts to reconstruct our agricultural landscape so that fewer animals are killed in production. But there is a question of practical feasibility. Let's take an even more extreme example. According to the Federal Aviation Administration, between 1990 and 2014, 134,000 birds and 2,600 land mammals were struck by aircraft. Yes, it's birds flying into jet engine turbines and smashing into airplane windows. And most of the time, it's fatal to the bird. If we were to seek to exclude suffering and cruelty as far as is possible, we would have to commit to never flying again unless we could bring those numbers down to zero. Now, let's get to the practicable side of the phrase and see how it works. By itself, it seems like it would not be demanding enough. Let's imagine a world in which we could save millions of animal lives if we as a society went just beyond what was practicable or feasible or realistic. What we owe morally to animals in this world, if we owe anything at all, should be the same as in the real world, right? If in that world we decided that since it just didn't make sense to try to help any animals, we wouldn't, then it seems like we might be failing what morality demands of us. If, of course, it was close to impossible to help any animals, then we could probably be off the hook. Fortunately, in this world, it is quite practicable, and in many cases beneficial for us to help animals. So neither practicable nor possible on their own seems suitable for a definition of veganism. At least that's how it seems to me. Whether that's true or not might depend on how you interpret the definition. Of course, some people may not agree with the definition at all. More conservative vegans might think that practicable on its own is sufficient, while more liberal ones might think we must do everything possible. I'm not actually sure what people think about this definition, or whether it carries any weight, but I think it serves really nicely to succinctly and reasonably establish what people who are interested in animal welfare adhere to. So what about the rest of the definition? Why include exploitation? And what does cruelty involve? Regarding exploitation, we can think of another thought experiment. Let's imagine that there's a racehorse that is owned by a very kind and generous master. From a young age, the horse is cared personally by the master, and they grow to have a connection. The horse is raced every month and gets plenty of rest in between. It is fed its favorite food, is groomed and massaged, and retires early to live out the rest of its life as a breeder. It dies eventually after a long life, with no injuries or lack of food or comfort, and with many offspring. Even though the horse was not necessarily treated cruelly, it was still exploited for its ability to race and breed. Importantly, it had no choice in the matter. It was not free to decide that that was what it would want to do or not. But that raises the question, which relations with animals are acceptable? Are the ones we hold with our pets acceptable? Are we exploiting them? Certainly rescues are better off in loving homes than wasting their lives away in a shelter. But what about animals that are bred to be our pets? Are those animals free? Are they being used only to fulfill a specific human purpose? What about animals like seeing eye dogs? These are hard questions. One philosopher that we'll get to more in depth in another episode, Peter Singer, provides a fairly radical but simple test to assess whether a relation with an animal is morally justifiable or not. He believes that all beings are subject to the principle of equality, in which all beings' interests are considered with equal weight. This means that no being's interests are worth more than any other. Singer states that when we eat meat, for instance, we violate the principle of equality because we sacrifice the most important interest of other animals, life, to promote the most trivial of our own interests, taste or appetite. An easy test for Singer to tell if we're violating the principle, and therefore whether a particular relation we have is justifiable, is by replacing the animal in question with a human and seeing if our judgment changes. If it does change, Singer says that we are guilty of speciesism, since the value we assign our own interests is greater than the value we assign for other species' interests. So, would we be happy to replace the horse in my thought experiment with a human? Probably not. However, this case might be relevantly disanalogous, or have differences that affect our judgments that aren't related to what we're looking into, namely, the equal consideration of interests. It might be disanalogous because a horse does not have all of the same interests as a human. They have different social behaviors and different levels of intelligence, and that might be what's responsible for making us think that replacing a horse with a human in this case would be wrong. But we can change the case so that the social elements are accounted for, say by stipulating that the human was born and bred to race alongside other humans rather than horses. Singer addresses the intelligence worry in similar comparisons by stipulating that the human has some specific, irreversible brain damage and therefore has the same intelligence level as a horse. With these changes to the case, it seems like all the relevant interests are accounted for. But do the changes to the case make you any more willing to replace a horse with a human? Just something to think about. Keep in mind this is not what all vegans hold. It's just one way in which we can evaluate the justifiability of our relations with animals. One last thing about the definition I'd like to discuss is what is meant by animal. Like I talked about in my last video, typically when we say animal, we're referring to non-human animals. But humans are animals too. And I think this implicit distinction that is made is symptomatic of the way that we typically think about ourselves and our relationship to animals. We think that we're a class of our own, separated by the rest of the animal kingdom, purportedly because we occupy some unique position in evolution, because of our intelligence, souls. Many reasons are put forth, and in some of my future videos, I'll evaluate them. We're different in important ways from other animals, and even vegans draw a line somewhere as to where our consideration of their interests end. Usually that line is drawn at sentience, or the ability to feel and perceive the world. Physiologically, this generally occurs with the development of a nervous system. Ethicists will then appeal to a being's interests or their ability to experience suffering as the reason why sentience matters. What animals are sentient, of course, is an ongoing debate in science. As a result of the ambiguity, some vegans eat bivalves, such as clams and oysters, and some eat honey, which costs the life of bees. Clearly plants are not sentient, and clearly mice are. But what about insects? It's not so clear. However, for most proponents of veganism, the important thing is to exclude as far as is practical and possible. So accidentally swatting a fly doesn't invalidate one's efforts. Just because we can't attend to all animal suffering in the world, maybe insects and bivalves, the antelope killed in the wild by the lion, or penguins killed by Arctic seals, that doesn't mean we ought to give up helping animals that are beyond a shadow of a doubt consciously suffering and easily aided. Let's start with doing what we can, which is a lot, and proceed from there. In sum, veganism is a way of thinking and living that culminates in a set of conscious decisions to improve the welfare of animals. Currently, this involves eating a plant-based diet, not purchasing leather, fur, down, or wool, not purchasing items such as cosmetics, soaps, and other hygiene products that are tested on animals, not purchasing animals from not reputable breeders, not hunting animals, nor watching or using animals for entertainment purposes. The list is long, and in reality even longer than I've just stated, as our use of animals and their products are extensive. As a result, so too must our abstinence of these products and actions be extensive. But veganism is not a trendy diet. It's not the next social club or place for moral grandstanding. It's just a compassionate way of living. The next topic I cover splits into 3 different videos, where I'll go over the 3 main classes of reasons of why people go vegan: ethical, health, and environmental. See you then.